How I begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the International Center Goa. We have with us Dr. Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan. We are very fortunate to have him also because Pakistan recently had its elections and the formerly flamboyant Imran Khan is now the Prime Minister, and obviously we were talking about this yesterday. Everyone in India has an opinion on Pakistan. Everyone is an expert. So, and he's a real expert because he has spent considerable time in Pakistan as Deputy High Commissioner and subsequently as High Commissioner of Pakistan. And he has also been High Commissioner in Singapore. But the reason I think we have him here, and I was thinking of bringing him last year, that's what I said, but the timing has to be right. And the Pakistan elections gave me an excuse to bring him. In fact, there will be another Pakistan expert nearly about a month from now, also to talk on Pakistan. So two lectures on Pakistan, recent developments and what it means for India. So brief introduction. Dr. T.C.A. Raghavan is a retired diplomat, IFS. Is currently Director General, in fact, about a month ago, right? So he was recently appointed Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs, ICWA, which is India's oldest foreign policy think tank, and was recently designated, less than 10 years ago, I think, as an institution of national importance. Dr. Raghavan retired as Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan 2013 to 15, where he had earlier served, as I mentioned, as Deputy High Commissioner from 2003 to 7. He has also been India's High Commissioner to Singapore 2009-13 and has served in Kuwait, the UK and Bhutan. In New Delhi, he has held key positions including that of the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, dealing with Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran. So as you can see, there's a long track record of dealing with all the troublesome countries in the region and beyond. Dr. Raghavan is interestingly also a PhD in history, not international, a PhD in history from Jawaharlal Nehru University, university which I'm proud to say we both attended, and a couple of other people, a bunch of other people I see here, who are no longer considered respectable at times. Anyway, so he is also a PhD in history from Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he also earned his MPhil degree earlier, about 10 years earlier, so in the 1980s. Dr. Raghavan's current interests are historical research, strategic analysis, and the diplomatic and intellectual history of modern India. His first book, two of his books were published in 2017 within the space of 6 months. And depending on what your taste is, you can consider one or the other, but I'm told both are excellent books. As somebody who studies South Asia occasionally, I would point to the book on Pakistan, but otherwise the second book received, and I'll list them both. His first book was Attendant Lords, Bahram Khan and Abdul Rahim, Courtiers and Poets in Mughal India, published by HarperCollins. And this book earned the Irfan Habib Prize in History, which is huge, really. So it's a big book by any standards. The second book is the one which would interest many more people, I think. It is called The People Next Door, The Curious History of India's Relations with Pakistan, which was published again late in 2017 with HarperCollins. Both books, as I mentioned, have been very, very well received. In fact, Dr. Raghavan was telling me the last 2 years he's been traveling a lot thanks to these two books. So parts of India which he may not have been to earlier, including Goa, where he last came in 1982. And he remembers the wine that he drank at that time. And I advised him not to try that again last evening. So Dr. Raghavan writes lectures and participates regularly in discussions on issues dealing to Indian and South Asian diplomatic history, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan and Southeast Asia. Please, let's give a very warm welcome to Dr. Raghavan.
To Dr. Pushkar and the International Center for having invited me here this morning. Yes, I've returned to Goa after many years, 3.5 decades. But it's nice to find so many old friends in Goa, which always provokes a certain line of thinking about coming here more frequently or staying here for longer. But I'm very grateful to the International Center for having given me this opportunity this morning to talk about India and Pakistan. As Dr. Pushkar said, this is a subject which is on which there are very well developed and articulated views, and there is a great deal of knowledge in India. So it's always a challenge about what to say, which is new. And I thought, therefore, I'll talk a little bit about the past, and I did this consciously because, in many ways, everything in India-Pakistan relations is also about the past. It has a great deal to do with the present, of course, but it has a great deal to do with the past. And one of my very distinguished predecessors as High Commissioner in Islamabad, and later on was Foreign Minister of India, and is a distinguished man of letters, Natwar Singh. In his book, he has written, while reflecting on India-Pakistan relations, there's a very cryptic sentence which says that when you look at India-Pakistan relations, the future lies in the past. Which is not necessarily to say that whatever is going to happen in the future has to do with history or is predetermined. But in a certain way, you cannot look ahead without first looking back. So I thought I'll talk a little bit about India-Pakistan, the background and the history, and then, of course, talk a little bit about what Dr. Pushkar referred to as the new developments in Pakistan, the elections, and then where we go from here. There is, of course, nothing definite in any of all this. What I will convey are my views, and there are obviously many different views in India, as indeed they are in Pakistan. Because one of the interesting things about India-Pakistan history is how the same set of facts, and the facts are accepted, can be viewed in radically different ways, which is what makes for such a contested relationship in the first place. Now, in India, of course, it's well known there are two narratives on Pakistan, and to some extent there have always been two narratives on Pakistan. And in one view, the weight of history and the legacy issues are so important that the relationship itself cannot change. It can never change. These are ideological in nature, they're territorial in nature. There's the question of parity, which is the idea of parity is deeply imprinted in the Pakistani psyche. There's Kashmir and many others. So one narrative is in brief that the power of history is so compelling that the relationship is not capable of changing. And from that flow one set of policy takeaways. The second narrative is that yes, there are historical differences, but they can and should be overcome. And therefore, you should not begin with the view that the relationship is incapable of change, but to see how you can work your way around difficult issues and how you can surmount history in some way or the other. And that is this narrative is informed by developments, for instance, in the European Union, what has happened in Southeast Asia, where equally difficult contested relationships have transformed themselves through sets of policies chosen by different countries. So in India we live with these two narratives, and why this should be so is quite obvious, because if you begin with the last 20 years, you see this whole set of negatives which have had a major impact on India-Pakistan relation. Now these are well known, and this list can be made even longer. But the negatives are there. At the same time, for those who argue the contrary point of view, that no change is possible, there's also a set of positives. Now, admittedly, the negatives are much stronger than the positives, but that both are there cannot also be be contested. So this mixture of negatives and positives is really what fuels these two parallel narratives and gives them their internal rigor and consistency. And the interesting thing is that this story of positives and negatives has been in India-Pakistan relations from the very beginning. And if you look at it in structural terms, you can break up the past 70 years of India-Pakistan relations in 6 or 7 main phases, beginning from 1947 till now. There are 6 or 7 main phases, and each of these phases has its own characteristics. So I've attempted such a schematic breakup of the relationship, and if you begin, let's say, with 1947, and it's a critical year for understanding what happened between India and Pakistan when India was divided. The general impression we have is of one single partition which led to the breakup of India, and then India and Pakistan emerged. But when you look at it, you realize that there was not one single partition. There was in fact a cluster of partitions which happened in 1947. There was first of all the partition of British India, which was a legal fact that India and Pakistan emerged out of an undivided entity. You had the partition or the division of Bengal, often forgotten, but it's quite a different experience from the third partition or division, which was of Punjab. And the big difference between the Punjab and Bengal divisions was that the Punjab partition was basically the outcome of 100% ethnic cleansing on both sides. West Punjab was emptied of Hindus and Sikhs, who all came to the east, and East Punjab was more or less, not entirely, not to the same extent, it was never as comprehensive, but East Punjab, there was massive ethnic cleansing of Muslims. So this exchange of population or displacement of population, which is our abiding memory of partition for many of us, but it is a feature distinctive to Punjab. In Bengal, there was no such exchange of populations. There was an element of ethnic cleansing, there was an element of violence, but nothing comparable to what happened in Punjab. So the Bengal experience is quite different, and it continues on its different trajectory till 1971, when the trajectory changes, and thereafter up till now. But it's a different story, related of course to what happened in 1947, but following a slightly different trajectory. But there is also at the same time in 1947, 1948, the division of Kashmir, not a part of British India, a princely state, but it was also at that time divided, and it's a history which we can go into. But it's one of the clusters of partition which I said took place in 1947. And finally, very important for our times today, when you look at the question of what is happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, was what many Pathans felt was the division of the Pathans, or the Pashtuns, through the Durand line becoming an international border as Pakistan claimed. And this led to that celebrated moment in the United Nations when Pakistan applied for membership of the United Nations in September 1947. The only country which objected was Afghanistan, saying that the borders it claims for itself don't really exist, and the Pathans are being divided by means of an international border. So I find it's useful in analytical terms, because when you look at the long overhang of history on India-Pakistan issues, to see all these divisions, and quite frankly, the most important of the divisions I forgot to mention in this, the most important of the partitions of divisions was the sixth. I mentioned 6, 5 for the sixth, which is the division of the Muslim community of undivided India. Because what in effect took place was that Muslims were split in two. Many went to Pakistan, many were from Pakistan, but a very substantial number stayed back in India. So these issues have a certain influence, and they erupt from time to time whenever any discussion or whenever any India-Pakistan factor comes into play. In 1947, 1948, what also took place was a cluster of accession crises, and each of them casts a long shadow on India-Pakistan relations for the next 60, 70 years. And they all happened more or less at the same time, and these were related to the accession of Junagadh, of Jammu and Kashmir, of Kalat in Baluchistan, and finally in Hyderabad. Again, the details of it are possibly known to each of you, but the fact that these multiple accession crises combined with these multiple divisions all happened together in a compressed period of about 12 to 18 months, really what explains the initial dynamic of India-Pakistan relations. And that's why I treat this 47 to 50 as a very important formative influence on what happened later. Now this next period, quite interestingly, given this traumatic beginning, is quite a cooperative one, because a great many things which should not have been taking place given this background of acrimony and violence and ethnic cleansing. In fact, you have a period of very creative diplomacy. So you have, for instance, one way of dealing with this Bengal situation of a very large Muslim minority in the divided state of Bengal in India, and a very large Hindu minority in the divided state of Bengal in Pakistan, East Pakistan. So how to deal with this? What the leadership in India and Pakistan were very clear about is that the Punjab model cannot be applied to Bengal. We cannot have 100% ethnic cleansing, because that will threaten the stability of both, it will threaten both our stabilities. So instead what you have is something called, which is now known as the Liaquat-Nehru Pact on minorities, and something far ahead of its times. Because they said that the only way we can deal with the communal situation and the violence which is taking place is that we give each other some kind of say in determining the affairs of minorities in the other country. Now, when you think about it, there's something like this happening in 1950, much before you have interlocking institutions of this kind emerging in Europe. I mean, Europe is known for this kind of, or much before any kind of discussion of this is taking place in the United Nations. It's quite advanced thinking on the part of India and Pakistan to have reached this very pragmatic arrangement. I don't think either side, or especially in India, nobody had any illusions about it, because everyone realized the great pressure the Hindu minority was under in East Pakistan. But it was seen as a pragmatic way of dealing with a very difficult situation. It's a different matter how well it worked, because the history of the next 20 years shows that the problem, that the Liaquat-Nehru Pact did not really address the problems which Hindus in East Pakistan faced, but it was a pragmatic way out of a situation in 1950 which had developed, which would have otherwise led to a second India-Pakistan war soon after the first war over Kashmir. Similarly, there were other positive developments at that time, ending finally with the Indus Waters Treaty, when Jawaharlal Nehru went to Karachi and signed the Indus Waters Treaty with Ayub Khan. So I would say the first decade, or a little over a decade, is a very cooperative phase. The next phase is not, because it's dominated by three major conflicts, beginning, of course, the tone for these were all set by the India-China conflict in 1962. But if the 50s is a cooperative phase, the 60s is in fact a phase of conflict, ending finally with 1971, and that story is known. The next period, you see an attempt at rebuilding relations again. this mix of positives and negatives is there through the 70s. 1976 to 1979, again a very creative period in India-Pakistan relations. Now, why this should be so, and if one looks at the debates of the late 60s and 70s, you find the similar debate of these two colliding narratives. One point of view being that really there's no point making this investment and trying to improve relations, and the other point of view being that no, 1971 and Simla has provided us an opportunity and we should try to make use of it. Why did this phase end? Again, is a very interesting question. I think this phase ended not because of developments to do with India and Pakistan, but because of the external situation changing. And in 1979, that external situation changed very dramatically with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the execution of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the revolution in Iran, and other factors. It was the regional environment which brought about a major change in India-Pakistan relations. If you look exactly 10 years later, 1989, again, a year in which everything changes for India and Pakistan, and they are really not being in a position to do much about it, which is the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Berlin Wall comes down, the beginnings of the crack-up of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, and all of this coincides with the Kashmir factor after having remained quiet from 1965. Suddenly Kashmir comes to the center of our radar with the beginnings of the insurgency. Now, it is obviously related to what has happened in Afghanistan and the end of the Cold War, because the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan gave rise to this sense of triumphalism in many in Pakistan, that if we can defeat a Soviet power in Afghanistan, we can apply that same template in Kashmir. So you have the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in 89 ending, and 1990, almost immediately after it, the beginnings of the insurgency. So the decade of the 80s is really influenced by these two major poles of 1979 and 1989, and international and regional developments, more or less circumscribing what you can do together bilaterally. The next, of course, is the period of the 90s, which is dominated by, it's a period of great stress in bilateral relations, dominated by a huge range of factors, most of all Kashmir. But it's also to do with what is happening in Punjab, the internal situation in Pakistan itself, to some extent the internal situation in India. It's a period of very little dialogue, great tensions, near war situations, ending finally with the nuclear tests. From post 1998, and I think we are still very much in the phase of which began in 1998, and it's the post-May 1998 world where you have a nuclearized South Asia. India and Pakistan both declared nuclear weapon states, and different developments in that, some positive, some negative, but again, you can see this common thread of the collision of these two narratives, that how do we deal with a country like Pakistan, and the divisions between the strategic optimists and the strategic pessimists, and it's a kind of roller coaster ride from Prime Minister Vajpayee's visit to Lahore, the Lahore Declaration, followed by Kargil, the hijacking of IC-814, how the global narrative on terrorism changes post 9/11, the attack on our parliament, Operation Parakaram, and the entire chronology is punctuated by these milestones which you're aware of. Clearly, there is this sense of frustration in India about how these two narratives seem to be, in this period, seem to have internally exhausted themselves, because they show up no real new answers apart from a repetitive pattern that you have taken certain initiatives and they have not worked, so you've gone into a crisis mode, and then you will find some way of emerging from that crisis mode through another set of initiatives. So that sense of frustration is inevitable, but I think it's also important to look at certain longer term trends, and these have to do with changes in Pakistan, with changes in India, and then changes in the external situation. So if you look at the period of the last 20 years, which is this set of slides, these developments, plus what I showed you earlier, the positives and the negatives, what are the long-term trends which emerge? I think first to look at the long-term trends in Pakistan. I think the long-term trends have a great deal to do with the internal security situation in Pakistan itself. And I was mentioning to General Karwal, because he was defense attaché in Pakistan from 2001 to 2004, in the immediate 9/11 phase, that in Pakistan something very, very striking happened 2007 onwards, from roughly between 2007 to 2015. And I don't think we, in India, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we were sufficiently cognizant of that development. And that was the collapse of internal security in Pakistan. And this had to do with the episode about the Nawab of Bukti, the Bukti Nawab being killed in Balochistan, then the Lal Masjid raid ordered by General Musharraf. But what happened, and if I can skip a few slides and come to, if you look at what happened between 2007 and 2016 in terms of the spread of terrorist attacks, and it was actually quite it's quite startling to see as to how every single institution in Pakistan felt that it was under threat, and that there was no hope, and it was not as if the attacks were only on civilian targets. The attacks on the military, the attacks on the military were equally spectacular. So everyone in Pakistan felt that we are in a grave, we are under a grave threat. And when I returned in 2013 to Pakistan after a gap of about 6 or 7 years, what I felt was that there was a collapse of public morale. That people felt that the state is withering away. The military on which we have invested so much of our hopes and aspirations and our capital is incapable of defending us. So it was a collapse of public morale. Why it happened is very clear, that from the time of the Afghan Jihad through the 1990s, the Kashmir Jihad, the Pakistan military had trained institutions, had trained groups and extremist groups, and developed them to be used as instruments of policy, especially against India. And many of these groups had acquired a life of their own, and in fact had turned on Pakistan itself. In very simple terms, that is what happened, that instruments which you had created had turned on you. But the impact of that was very considerable. And it was to me, it was, you could, when you entered a room, you could make out that this is not the Pakistan of 2002, 2003, 2004. Something has shifted here. And the big question was that how will Pakistan emerge out of this crisis? And it was a crisis not just of internal security, it was a multiple crisis in many ways. Everything seemed to be just coming apart, and there was this constant point of discussion that is Pakistan a failed state. There was international isolation, there was extreme US pressure, the Osama bin Laden raid, and so on and so forth. Now, quite surprisingly, the Pakistanis managed to get out of the situation. It was a matter of great surprise. And how it happened was that the military took very determined action against the terrorist groups which were attacking it. And this began in 2015 with Operation Zarb-e-Azm and has continued since then. Now, Zarb-e-Azm, again, I think, if you look at it objectively, it was possibly the most concerted use of military power by any military force inside its own country. You have no exact parallels for it anywhere else in the world. Normally you use military force in other countries or inside, beyond your own borders. But the use of firepower to the extent which was used in Zarb-e-Azm, which really broke the back of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, was something which I think many of us, and many of us not just in India but even elsewhere in the world, had not believed the Pakistani army to have the capacity for. And the fact is they did it. And in doing so, it had 2 or 3 other consequences, which is now I'm coming up to our own times. It had 2 or 3 other consequences. First was, I think that concerted use of military force greatly impressed the Chinese. And they thought that an institution which they had possibly not given the same credit to was capable of performing. I think it greatly influenced the Chinese and was a major factor in their determination to forge even stronger relations with Pakistan. In 2002-2003, my recollection, and I may be wrong, but my recollection is that the most important man in the Chinese embassy in Pakistan used to be the defense attaché, because it was largely a military-to-military relationship. By 2015-2016, it had changed. The most important person was the ambassador, because what was a military relationship had become primarily an economic relationship through the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And so I think it greatly impressed the Chinese, and it pushed and it enabled the Chinese to take strategic decisions on economic assistance on the grounds that this is our neighbor, it's going down, but it has great capacities and we should help it. And of course, there are multiple other motives. There are strategic motives, how to checkmate India, etc., etc. But I think the use of firepower by the Pakistan military in its own territory was an important determining factor. The second was that, and this is in 2015, there's a marked change, because you have in 2006-2007 the end of Musharraf, the rise, the assertion of political authority in Pakistan through the Pakistan People's Party, Nawaz Sharif and the Pakistan Muslim League, the rise of media, judicial activism. It suddenly appeared that the role of the Pakistan military was being limited. And it was being limited because you have the rise of these very powerful civilian and civil society forces. It was being limited by a whole lot of other factors too. The Osama bin Laden raid right under the noses of the Pakistan army was a major setback for it in terms of public estimation. That how can this happen right under your nose, that you didn't know Osama bin Laden was there and you were unable to prevent the Americans from carrying out this raid. So the Pakistan military, in terms of its own self-esteem and also in terms of the image it had in popular perception, it had suffered greatly. When Nawaz Sharif came to power in 2013, it actually appeared that you have a very powerful Prime Minister. Here is someone who has got a clear majority in an election. Soon after he was elected, he appointed a Chief of Army Staff of his choice, not going strictly by the seniority. He had appointed an acolyte as president, someone who was very close to him. the old activist Chief Justice had been changed and a new person had been appointed, it appeared Nawaz Sharif was totally in charge, and it made perfect sense to take major initiatives with him of the kind we saw in 2014 and 2015. But through Zarb-e-Azb, what the Pakistan military did was that it restored the confidence the Pakistani people had in it. They saw it again as an institution which was their ultimate safeguard, someone who could restore law and order, who could take on the terrorists. And in this process, the civil-military equation changed again. Now, I think everyone in Pakistan realized that post-Zarb-e-Azb, the civil-military equation has changed. And possibly the only person who didn't realize it was Nawaz Sharif himself, because he still thought he was in charge, when in fact the game had changed. And then we saw the whole sequence of events in 2016 and 2017, leading finally up to the election and Nawaz Sharif in jail and Imran Khan as Prime Minister. So what does Imran Khan mean as Prime Minister for us? Again, there are two views, that he is no more than a front for the army, and ultimately it will depend on what the army wants or what the military wants, and therefore we need not think that anything dramatic has changed. I think there is merit in that view. We can't act out of in optimism on the basis of our own fancies. But the fact is that in Pakistan, if you look at the history of Pakistan in the last 30, 40 years, you have had two kinds of prime ministers. You have on the one hand Benazir Bhutto, Nawaz Sharif, who are popular, charismatic leaders with a political base of their own, and who have a history of friction with the army. This really is what sums up Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif's political careers. Or you have people who are appointed as fronts by the military, which is Junejo in the 80s, or Jamali, Shaukat Aziz, and others in this century, who have no real political base or charisma of their own, but they are totally, they are like managers for a military government. Now, to my mind, Imran Khan doesn't fit in either of these two categories. It is true he is dependent on the army because the army doesn't see him as someone who is a person with whom they have had friction in the past. He, on his part, sees the importance of having a good relationship with the military all the time so that he doesn't commit the mistakes Nawaz Sharif did. So it's someone that the army is comfortable with. But at the same time, he is also very clearly a politician with a definite amount of charisma, a political base, and someone who has built up a party from ground up. So you have a new kind of prime minister. I don't think we can see him in the same way as we saw Shaukat Aziz, that he's a manager and he's a good professional manager whom the army has appointed. No, he's clearly not that. At the same time, he's not Nawaz Sharif or Benazir Bhutto. He doesn't have those legacy issues with the military. So we have a third category, and I think it's important that we see this as a third category, as something new. And this really is my final point, because I think when we look at India and Pakistan and the history and the legacy of past issues and so on, it's important. But I think it's also important we see how Pakistan is itself changing. And there are many indicators of that change, some of which are represented by Imran Khan's rise. I mean, the first and most significant change in Pakistan is that with a 20-year delay behind what happened in India, you have the emergence of a middle class. In India, we started talking about the middle class revolution from the 1980s. In Pakistan, it is happening 20 years later. But there is definitely the rise of a new middle class with different aspirations, with different views about the region, about the globe, and it's a class which feels the international isolation very, very strongly. So, which is why if you see many of Imran Khan's statements in that context, they make much more sense they're so much more aspirational in talking about how Pakistan must regain its place in the world, because it's a class which feels its great sense of isolation very, very strongly. So I think to see a changing Pakistan when we devise our policies makes eminent sense, rather than to see an entity which is frozen in time. Now, it is difficult for us to see that change, because while Pakistan may have changed in many ways, in other many significant ways which concern us directly, its behavior has not changed, especially with regard to terrorism, extremism in J&K and so on. So how do we then devise a policy is really the question which confronts the government, confronts all of us, and I thought I'll stop with that and take questions or discussions or comments, because as I said in the beginning, on Pakistan really you have a continuing discussion in India rather than a definite set of conclusions which can be reached. Thank you very much.
So we wanted to give you all experts enough time to grill Dr. Raghavan on whatever knowledge, wisdom you may have about Pakistan. He's thankfully no longer determining policy. He's going to be influencing policy as the Director General of a think tank, but I'm sure he's relaxed about the fact that he does not actually have to make the call on X, Y, or Z, because dealing with Pakistan is going to be troublesome, a challenge, and it's something which is not going away. I mean, Pakistan is next door. It has been with us for thousands of years, right? So over to you. Please keep your questions short. Please introduce yourselves. And if you belong to an institution, that will be good for us to know as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavan. That was a very illuminating talk. Most of us think that Pakistanis live under a delusion. They've recreated history. They think everything starts from the 8th century. 10 Indians are equal to 1 Pakistani. The children are taught that they demonize Indians. So the impression from what we read and hear is that they are living under a huge delusion. Are we also living under a similar kind of delusion? I mean, as Indians and Pakistanis? That's my first question. Secondly, how deep is the penetration of the Pakistani armed forces by the jihadi elements? Because if you look at instances like PNS Mehran, PNS Zulfikar, they were all inside jobs. There was this huge amount of collusion. So in the context of Pakistani nuclear arsenal, how deep, if any, is the penetration of the Pak armed forces by jihadi elements? Thank you.
I think there is a element of delusion in Pakistan, definitely, and this resort to conspiracy theories when a reasonable explanation will do, the exaggerated sense of victimhood, and again, amplified idea of Pakistan's geopolitical location and of the potential advantages of that. This all feeds into that delusion that somehow we are the chosen country, chosen people, but we are not getting our due. But I would caution against giving this too much importance. The fact is that when you live in Pakistan, you realize that despite all the state efforts at demonization of India, those efforts don't really succeed. There is very little hostility to Indians at the street level in Pakistan. If anything, there is a great fascination for India, because there's not so much diversity in Pakistan. People are fascinated by India's diversity. That how do you manage with so many languages? How do you talk to each other? Your cultural influence is much, much more than we, I think, ourselves comprehend. The power of Bollywood is phenomenal in Pakistan. So, so while this delusional element is there, it has not translated into hostility against India and Indians at street level to the same extent. It's there, certain sections, certain groups, but it's not something which you normally would encounter. And on the contrary, as an Indian, you're, in fact, you come up against the contrasting sentiments of, great interest, great admiration, great fascination with India.
People like Hassan Nisar, how influential are they?
Hassan Nisar is.
The intellectual, and he comes on TV very
Well, I think civil society in Pakistan is not as developed as India, and we can make a serious mistake of believing that what the opinion pages of Dawn, which is a liberal newspaper, that reflects Pakistani mainstream opinion. It does not. Civil society doesn't have the same. Their institutions haven't developed to the same extent as we have in India. But I would say that this demonization is not as comprehensive as many people think. Are we delusional in the same sense? I don't think we are delusional in the same sense, but I think we are guilty of thinking that Pakistan is just like us. It's not like us. It's much smaller than we are. It's a country which is 1/8 your GDP. Your defense expenditure is 8 or 9 times more. Your population is 6 times more. Your geographical spread is, enormous. So it's not a comparison in that sense. So I think we are delusional in the sense that we make Pakistan out to be larger than life, when in fact we should treat it as an important, as a neighbor, as a challenging neighbor. There are threats you cannot ignore, but at the same time it's a smaller country, and we don't have to go to often the lengths in imagining it to be something which it is not. About the intrusion of jihadi elements, there are two views, and in my view, I think the Pakistan military itself is very conscious about the danger this poses, and they go to quite extraordinary efforts to weed them out. And this, I think the efforts, especially at colonel upward levels, are quite intense. But you cannot, at a tactical level, at lower levels, cannot rule out, the jihadi entry. And the incidents you refer are examples of that. But I would say that, on the whole, given the sensitivity which the higher command shows to this issue, that they will do all they can to make sure that it doesn't get out of control.
Thank you, Ambassador. It was a wonderful narrative. I'm R.P. Pradhan. I teach international relations. So I have a little more, some amount of understanding on the whole issue, though I have no expertise on the area. My question is slightly onto the theoretical proposition that the whole story is largely been confined to a conflict story. If we look the other side around, and if I look at Europe for that matter, after years of centuries of conflict, they land up at Westphalia. Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, and then that delivered 200 years of peace to Europe. That's my first proposition. Do we have any scope of a similar kind of a initiative or similar kind of a proposition which can possibly create a peace prospect in this continent? That's one. Second question is that when Europe is moving towards the Second World War, there's also a very finely developed peace effort. If we talk of David Mitrani, Jean Monnet, and then finally Ernest B. Haas, they're talking about what you call the prospect of peace in the context of conflict, when the conflict is intense. And that's what we see is the growth of what we see the European Union, the European coal and steel community that emerges out of this thinking. Do we have a similar kind of a structural approach of some kind of engagement where countries can negotiate and look for a larger instrument, maybe the Asian Parliament, or some kind of an instrument where we are together to talk about peace and conflict? Is there any prospect? Thank you.
Well, the European example is quite compelling. But the fact is there are big differences between the two situations. The first is that the kind of conflict Europe saw in the first half of the 20th century, even with 1947 and all that, fortunately we've been spared that. It's what Europe saw in the First World War and the Second World War, then the conflict after the Second World War with massive displacements of population and so on. Actually, in South Asia, although you approached something like that in 1947, but you were still nowhere near it. That scale and magnitude of conflict. Secondly, the second big difference is that the European Union also emerged in the way it did because there was a clear sense of the victor and the vanquished at the end of the Second World War. And that made all that happened possible. In South Asia, you have no clear sense of victor and vanquished. For instance, in Pakistan, as I said, there is often amongst many this sense of triumphalism that if we just do 2 or 3 things right, we'll have total victory in Kashmir, India will break up, etc., etc. So there's no clear sense of victor and vanquished. So again, the two situations are not comparable. But most of all, I feel that the European example is not applicable to India because, what makes India different is the fact of its heterogeneity. That when European countries after Westphalia and especially in the first quarter of the 20th century, became ethnically homogeneous, which is what the First World War and the Second World War was about. That Germans felt that because we've got huge German populations in Czechoslovakia and Poland, that should be part of Germany, and that led to war. And finally, the outcome of it was Germany's defeat, and all the Germans from Poland and Czechoslovakia were forced into Germany. So ethnic homogeneity was the solution which Europe found to ending war and conflict. Now in India, we don't have that approach, as I said, which is why the Bengal Pact is so important. That ethnic homogeneity was not seen as an answer. What happened in Punjab in 1947 by many in the leadership in India was seen as an aberration, that there should not have been ethnic cleansing. And up to now, you have such a large Muslim population. So the India-Pakistan issues are, much more ideological, and they are foundational differences. So can you replace it with a, different kind of narrative? I don't think it's that easy. I think you can make efforts to have a different narrative, but I think in India-Pakistan relations, the only way forward is to build it block by block. And although it may not appear so, but in many ways things are better today than they were 20 years ago. Because despite the lows you have gone into, there's a minimum of trade which continues, there's a minimum of, you have not had total breakdown of relations as you had post-Kargil, or, you haven't had those kind of situations. So I think you have to look at a more block by block piecemeal approach, which doesn't sound very attractive, it doesn't sound very piecemeal. It sounds very piecemeal, and there's no larger narrative. But the experience is that larger narratives don't usually work out in the same way.
Doctor, welcome to Goa. My name is Bhaitwaz. I'm a civilian, sir. In the business of liquor, we make Feni. Sir, my two questions for you, sir. My question is kindled by putting myself in the shoes of the Pakistanis with regard to the nonsense happening in Kashmir. Do you think it is a manifestation of their Jawabi Hamla of our Mukti Bahini during the Bangladesh war? That's my first question, sir. My second question, sir, is with the polarization happening in our country and the perceived back foot quotient which is there among some Muslim community, which is true or not true, I wouldn't know. Do you think it makes it easier for Pakistan to recruit anti-nationals with this mahal of polarization and animosity between Hindu-Muslim brothers of our country, sir?
See, in my view, you can't relate India-Pakistan issues directly to what is happening inside India. It may be tempting to do so, but it doesn't work because in Pakistan there's always been this narrative, regardless of the ideological color of the government in India, there's always been this narrative that Muslims are in danger and Muslims are being discriminated against and Muslims face a great threat. So it's been there from the 50s. And that arises because of the foundational difference in the two countries. That India was secular, large Muslim and other minority populations. Pakistan is more of a denominational state. So that foundational character remains. And in India, regardless of which government has been in power, the view in Pakistan has been that the minorities are in great danger, and a country as diverse as India cannot possibly coexist peacefully, and it's bound to break up. So there is that view throughout. Now certainly with regard to Jammu and Kashmir, the narrative in Pakistan is exactly opposite to the narrative in India. Where most Pakistanis would say that yes, we have to free Kashmir and there is a freedom struggle taking place over there. It's no different from the Mukti Bahini in 1971, etc. So that narrative definitely is there. It's undeniable, which is why the conflict is so deep-rooted, because Kashmir in the end is also a foundational issue for India, just as it is a foundational issue for Pakistan. But the more, I think, in the past few years, the interesting thing which has happened is that there are a significant number of people in Pakistan who are thinking less in terms of conflict-driven solutions, but more in terms of workable solutions. So, for instance, what was attempted between 2004 and 2007 on J&K with General Musharraf, that no, we'll never be able to find a solution which satisfies both of us 100%. So let's try to do things which work around the problem, that soften the LOC, open up trade, have cross-border, cross-LOC links. So the number of people who are thinking, less in terms of conflict solutions, but more in terms of working solutions, is also increasing. So I think this, as I said, many things are changing in Pakistan. It's difficult for us to recognize that change because that change doesn't affect us directly. Old Pakistani behavior continues. But nevertheless, the fact that it is changing in the medium and long term is a hopeful sign.
Excuse me. I'm a live member here. My name is Brajendra. Thank you very much, sir. It was an enlightening lecture. And I came to understand some of the very crucial elements of what exists between the two countries. Now, my question is very simple. I feel strongly that India has never been fair to Pakistan. You see, there was a slide which was there, which you have, we cut short that slide. In 1947, there was a slide about Junagadh. You see, the basis of partition was that majority Muslim areas go to Pakistan. which are on the border areas, of course. And it exactly, you see, there was a Junagadh case. Junagadh was just opposite of Kashmir. See, today's lecture is all about Kashmir. Indo-Pak relations in context of Kashmir. That's the topic of today's lecture, so I'll talk about it. Now the question is, I'll come to the question later. Quickly, Junagadh had a majority Hindu population, but was ruled by a Muslim ruler. Kashmir had a majority Muslim population, but was ruled by a Hindu ruler. Now the fact is, Kashmir should have gone, like Junagadh, the plebiscite was held, and Junagadh came to India, Gujarat. Whereas Nehru avoided plebiscite all through. It was Jawaharlal Nehru who did not allow Kashmir to be sorted out. Kashmir, in all fairness, should have gone to Pakistan, which is the right thing in terms of the rules of partition at that point of time. So as long as this survives, and in Pakistan, you mentioned about Soviet withdrawal. The Soviet withdrawal was primarily because of Americans built up Taliban. Americans built up Taliban, and Soviets couldn't stand that finally. So they had no choice but to withdraw. Now the same Taliban is being used. The jihadis are very well entrenched there. Unless we seriously solve Kashmir, and the only solution is to give the Srinagar to them, really, keep Jammu and Ladakh with us. What do you say about it? As you are a very senior diplomat. I mean, leaving aside the government side, you are no longer with the government.
Well, in my view, I think first of all, the historical factors are important, but then you have to see the historical chronology quite rigorously. And if you look at the chronology in detail, then you will come to answers different from what you are suggesting. So if you look at the sequence, it's quite true. When the partition of India took place, British India was to be partitioned, and the princes were given the option of choosing either dominion. They could choose either India or Pakistan. The first question which came up was in Junagadh. You quite correctly said Muslim majority, Hindu majority Muslim ruler.
Right.
The Muslim ruler acceded to Pakistan. The question is, if Pakistan was to be a Muslim majority state, Muslim denominational state, that was the reason why it came into existence. Why did Pakistan accept the accession? But that is the first question, and this is the question which came up in late August, early September 1947. And the Pakistanis were repeatedly asked, why are you accepting the accession of a state which is not Muslim majority? So clearly then the idea was more territorial than religious or denominational. I mean, the idea in Pakistan, which is why the accession of Junagadh was accepted. The same question came up in 1949 with Hyderabad. Muslim ruler, large Hindu majority. There was no option. The Nawab of Nawab of Hyderabad had to accede to India. He had no other way out. But for the Pakistanis, it was important that Hyderabad not be part of India. That you have an independent Hyderabad, which is somehow there in the heart of India, and it's an independent state which is closely related. So I think the problem was not in Kashmir per se. The problem was the legacy of bitterness which already existed in 1947, where the issue was seen in zero-sum games. Now, it's quite possible that what happened in Kashmir could have taken a different trajectory, but once the invasion from Pakistan began, then there was no other option but to take the trajectory which we took. Now suppose, I'm just saying, suppose there had been no invasion from Pakistan in October 1947, no tribal invasion, and the Maharaja had signed the standstill agreement with Pakistan. The standstill agreement had continued for some more time. and then he had taken a decision on his own which dominion he would accede to, I think history could have been quite different. But he faced his own set of issues. And the set of issues he faced was that he had a very powerful political movement in Srinagar Valley, led by Sheikh Abdullah, which was totally opposed to the two-nation theory. And they saw the two-nation theory of Muhammad Ali Jinnah as something which is foreign to Kashmir's ethos and so on. So I don't think you can reduce it to this simple matter that Junagadh, therefore the example of J&K. I think the Junagadh example is, really the question is why did Pakistan accept the accession? And there's no answer to that. Now, you also can't find answers now based on, I mean in Pakistan many people have this historic sense of wrong. That Pakistan should have come to, I mean we all know K in Pakistan stands for Kashmir. There's this historic sense of wrong. But you cannot correct a historic wrong or perceived historic wrong by going back to the past. You have to look ahead. And which is why what happened post-2004 or post-2003 is so important in India-Pakistan relations. And not what happened in 1947.
UN resolution of plebiscite, why was it not implemented?
No, you see, there are many reasons for that. And they are not just one reason that Nehru didn't want the plebiscite. Nehru agreed to it. Many people advised him, don't agree. Why are you making this mistake? Once the Pakistanis have resorted to military means, let's deal with it by military means. Why are you going to the UN? Why are you making this error? Now the plebiscite, why was it not done to? I mean, there's a huge amount of scholarship on it. The real question was of how is the plebiscite in the parts which were in Pakistani occupation to be conducted? The UN resolution, the first condition was, I didn't have time to go into that. The first condition was that Pakistan should withdraw its forces and its tribal invaders. Now, when the Pakistanis refused to do that, then the rest of the part of the resolution about plebiscite and so on became inoperative.
Thank you.
Namaskar, sir. Dharmendra Sharma, Chief Secretary. Two different. One is on the question of what takes place in India internally. I take the argument not exactly the same, but post 71, the kind of aggregation of political opinion in India in favor of a particular party and a particular person has taken place. 71 Mrs. Gandhi, post this thing, and now 2014 Mr. Modi and now this aggregation or this narrowing of bandwidth strategically is important because suddenly our capability to take political decisions and execute them has gone up very dramatically compared to a coalition situation. So how does this play out in the Pakistan mind, and how does it play out? Is it an opportunity, or itself is now becoming a hindrance to looking at other options because you're so sure of what you think is right? Second is a question of the OBR, that one road initiative, and the role of China. Now when it came to US, Pakistan very cleverly created leverage, while being part of the US interest because of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East connection. China, is it moving toward being a textbook client state of China? Because when the Chinese come in and when the economic investments come, so the question that comes in the future 5 years, can you have an Indo-Pak solution without a Chinese input and then what was said? Are we looking at a wider India, Pakistan, China? That's where the stability will come. Thank you.
No, this accumulation of political initiative in India is an interesting point. It's true, a great deal of what has happened in India-Pakistan relations has largely depended on initiatives being taken by India. This was true in the 70s, true in the 90s, true in this century, and it's to do with powerful, charismatic leaders, Mrs. Gandhi, others you mentioned. The problem in this is that everything doesn't depend on Indian policy, because you're dealing with a country. Pakistan is 200 million people, fierce sense of themselves and their own nationhood, and tremendous domestic challenges. So you may devise what you think is the best policy possible, but whether it will work or not is not in your hands. I mean, the present government took major policy initiatives. I mean, for instance, the invitation to Nawaz Sharif to come for the swearing in, Prime Minister Modi going to Lahore, and even others. So very powerful political initiatives to show that I'm prepared to go the extra mile. I'm prepared to invest my personal political capital on the India-Pakistan relationship. But it didn't work. And it didn't work, as I say, it didn't work because, as I said, it's 200 million people, and internally there can be multiple other trajectories which are totally disharmonious to the possibilities you have in mind. And Nawaz Sharif, whatever his personal inclinations could have been, the fact that he could not manage the civil-military equation meant that the relationship with India was not going to go anywhere. Now, it doesn't mean that the army is totally opposed to any improvement of relations with India. This is the conclusion some people draw. I don't think so. I think we have taken major steps forward with the Pakistan military in this Waters Treaty with Ayub Khan, during Musharraf's time, during Zia's time. I think the problem is the absence of civil military stability means that anything which Pakistan does is very vulnerable. And where India is concerned, it's especially vulnerable. And if the Pakistan military does not trust whoever is the Prime Minister, period, if there's zero trust even otherwise, then obviously they will not trust what he or she is going to do on India. So as I said, India-Pakistan issues then become a casualty of this internal contestation in Pakistan. So while the aggregation of political will in India is important and it's a powerful instrument you have, but we should also recognize its limits, that you're dealing with 200 million people, and what will happen over there is not something which you can control by your policies. OBUR and is Pakistan becoming a total client state? I think there are signs of it, but we can't jump to conclusions. The Chinese are putting in $60 or $50 billion in the next 20 years. Yes, huge investment. But the Americans put in between 2001 and 2015 $35 billion. And there's no trace of it. In the 50s, when the US assistance programs to Pakistan began, there were discussions in India that Pakistan is becoming a client state of the US, or the US has a colony in South Asia. Not true. It didn't happen like that. This is 200 million people. It's a very large country. It has nuclear weapons. They have a fierce sense of nationhood. So whether it will become a colony, I doubt it. But definitely the Chinese have come in at a time when the Pakistanis felt isolated. When they felt that everyone else had deserted them, the Chinese have stood by them. The Chinese motives are themselves mixed. Partly they are strategic, to do with India, to do with the Indian Ocean, access to hydrocarbons. Partly they are driven by deep concern about the internal state of Pakistan, which is so close to it itself. So it's a mixture of motives. But I think to say that I think the Pakistanis are going to be deeply beholden to China, because of which the Chinese will have a major role to play in Pakistan. But does it make it a client state? I don't think so. Does it mean we can look for China, Pakistan, India solutions? I don't think so also. Because you have to look at the state of our own relations with China, and also how we envisage that relationship. If we envisage India-Chinese relations as fundamentally adversarial, then how will we allow it to play a role in another adversarial relationship?
I'm Dr. Antonio de Rosario Fernandez. I am a freelance writer. I am having a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned about Serbia offensive, I think 2015. It was a turning point for the renaissance of the Pakistan military in the eyes of its own populace. Can you give the strategies to look up on the internet? Second question is about Lieutenant General V.R. Raghavan. He had come down here to Goa at this international center in the aftermath of the 9/11, and he gave an excellent talk. Are you any relative of his?
No, I'm not no relation of his, but we've all read his book on Siachen, and he's a very distinguished soldier. And Zarbiaz is Z-A-R-B, A-S-B, with a small I in between. Zarbiaz.
Good afternoon. Dr. Raghavan, wonderful presentation. My name is Rahul Chandavarkar. I'm a media consultant and a journalist. The question I have in my mind is, there's been some media reports recently on how nations like the US, Russia and China have for many years been actively interacting with the Pakistan military as opposed to us. And we know, of course, why we deal with the political, the political team. But my question to you was, in this new situation where Imran Khan is a charismatic leader and the military also will remain powerful in Pakistan, would it be a good idea to increase our interaction with the Pakistan military? While something like a 50-50, so that we are on, we have our a foot in both doors.
Well, there are always questions about why don't we deal with the military. If the real power is there, why not talk to them? And there are many answers. But the fact is that the Pakistan military is not keen to deal with you. It's not as if over the years we have not tried in terms of, it's not to do with India-Pakistan. I mean, in any set of relationships today, all institutions have relations with each other. For instance, you have judges meeting with each other, you have journalists meeting with each other, you have police, militaries meeting. I mean, for instance, if you have Bangladesh, you will have the Indian Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Navy Staff talking to his counterpart in Bangladesh, in Nepal and elsewhere. It's not unusual that you should want to do the same thing with Pakistan. Not because it's exceptional, because it's the normal thing to do. Now, why hasn't it happened? It's happened because the Pakistan military doesn't want to deal with you directly. And it doesn't want to deal with you directly because it thinks of itself, it doesn't just think in military terms, it also thinks in political terms. In many ways it's like a political party. And they therefore, as a political party, they believe themselves that we are the guardians of the flame. We are the guardians of the idea of Pakistan. So we cannot let anything which will erode that, that role as the guardian of the flame. So over the years, we've tried many times to deal with the Pakistan military. Let's have sports contacts, or let's have seminars, but it's never worked. So they're not very keen to deal with you. The other point is that, you cannot solve Pakistan's internal problems through the medium of India-Pakistan relations. They have to solve their problems themselves. They have to set their house in order that the political class and the military have a working relationship. Tomorrow you may be in a situation, it has happened in the past, that you can reach deals with the military which the political class doesn't agree to. After the Indus Waters Treaty was signed, it was a military dictatorship under Ayub Khan. But many political figures, including Fatima Jinnah's sister, said that this general has sold us down the drain. We've got an agreement which is not in our interest. So this internal disharmony is not something you can solve. The Pakistanis have to do it themselves.
Thank you.
So in a way you are saying, So in a way, you are saying that the nature of civil-military relations impacts on India as well.
Yes.
It's not just on the domestic politics of Pakistan, because it will be wrong to assume that the military has a hegemonic position within Pakistan. It does not. Right?
If we see greater stability within Pakistan, civil military, the political parties and the military, is that good for India-Pakistan relations? And perhaps with the situation where, as you say, the Pakistan military has established its own credentials within and re-established its own credentials within and sees itself as the guardian of the idea of Pakistan. And you have in Imran perhaps a political force which would be comfortable with, which the army would be comfortable with, and Imran and the political force can address itself to many other challenges Pakistan faces. I mean, 25 years ago, Pakistan was ahead of India economically. Today they are very, very far behind. India is recognized as a superpower in software, in many other things. Pakistan is nowhere there. So there are many challenges Pakistan has to face. And if the political party in Pakistan were to bend itself to those challenges, we refer to aspiration, we refer to rise of the middle class, then there would be greater stability in Pakistan. And does that portend well for India-Pakistan relations?
You see, there are different views. But in my view, if there is more stability in Pakistan, it's good for India-Pakistan relations. There are people who think otherwise. But this is my view, that better civil-military equation definitely is a good thing for India. Because it will mean more stability in India-Pakistan relations. And there are, the historical record has many examples that you have sharp downturns in relations, and those periods coincide with a spike in civil-military tensions in Pakistan. If you look at, now more and more evidence shows that there was a growing gulf between Musharraf and Nawaz Sharif, and Kargil was only a manifestation of that gulf. Similarly, other India-Pakistan situations are related to this civil-military divide in Pakistan. So in my view, yes, and you're quite right that in economic terms, one of the reasons why 1989 is so important, or 1990, is because apart from the other changes, what also changed was the economic dynamic between India and Pakistan. That till 1990, 1991, Pakistan growth rates were invariably, Pakistani economy invariably was performing better than the Indian economy. And that changed in 1990, 1991, and that has remained the case so far. Yeah.
I'm Rahul Tripathi from Goa University. I know I've asked you many questions in the morning, so I'll be very brief. I'll take you back to your original passion, which is history. It's often said that the reason why India and Pakistan, despite starting on a similar note, went on different tracks was that while there was a very strong political leadership which was able to provide stability and continuity, in Pakistan, in the absence of a tall political leadership, Jinnah's death immediately and Liaquat Ali's assassination, you had a vacuum which was later filled up by the army. Had Pakistan been able to provide a certain continuity in terms of political leadership, would the story of India-Pakistan had been different? And therefore, while Indian army continued to remain an army which is professional and under the civilian control, in Pakistan it got larger than life opportunity.
No, I would agree with that. I think in Pakistan, after the assassination of Liaquat Ali Khan, in the next 5 or 6 years, you had something like 10 prime ministers, till finally Ayub Khan's coup. So the absence of political leadership in the early years was a big setback for them. And the fact is, they also, in 47, there was a structural problem in Pakistan, which was that it had, what became Pakistan was a much smaller part of the subcontinent in in terms of economy and geographical area. But because of British policy, they inherited a much larger part of the military apparatus. So the resource demand by the military on a much narrower base was very high from the beginning. And you know, that itself played a certain role in what happened in the 50s in Pakistan.
So, despite the charisma that has been referred to of people like Imran Khan, and the point that you made about the average Pakistani in the street, as it were, being reasonably well disposed towards Indian people, do you not think, though, that in the final analysis, the bottom line is that the power equation in Pakistan is such that the army will always be able to pounce upon a situation which threatens to submerge it? And added to this factor, isn't it in China's interest to back up the army, for whom, as you say, they have a lot of respect? That's my first question. My first point, rather. My second point was only an observation. Sir, you did, in your very thorough analysis of the partition of India, as someone who's been through it, I felt a bit hurt, because you rather mentioned a great deal about Pakistan, about the Punjab situation, and how it was different from the Bengal situation. See, what you failed, with respect, what you failed to mention was the trauma that the province of Sindh experienced. And if you were me at the age of 10, and having seen what happened then, and having been through what happened then, and having then come to Bombay and visited the Sindhi camp in Kalyan, you would have had a slightly hawkish feeling that underpinned, if you like, that underscores the suspicion that many Indians feel. They might not express it, but many Indians feel about the Pakistanis.
The role of the Pakistan, no, it is true that the Pakistan military has a certain role in Pakistan. And there's a certain dominating influence they have had. In my view, Pakistan is changing. And the military is still important, but it's not like the old days. In the old days, when you saw the kind of events which were taking place on a daily basis between Nawaz Sharif and the military, the Dawn leaks and so on and so forth, in the old days there would have been a coup. But the Pakistan military can't do a coup in the old way now. You know, which is why they need an Imran Khan, and they need judiciary, and they need countervailing political power, because Pakistan has changed. And I think the fact that...
But the moment it gets too big for the goods, don't you think they might...
But they can, they cannot. It depends. You know, I mean, it's the same judiciary which helped the Pakistan military now. It was the same judiciary which turned against Musharraf in 2007. It's just getting more complicated. In a way, getting more complicated means you're getting more novel. Now, it's a long process. I mean, I don't say that it's going to end tomorrow. No, it's a long process. But the fact is, things are changing. The fact that you need elections, you need a charismatic figure to displace another charismatic figure, means that it's not like the old days anymore. About Sindh, well, in my book I've talked about Sindh a bit. I agree that the Sindhi experience is not captured in the same way in the normal narrative discussions as the Punjabi or Bengal experiences. But there are other experiences. You know, there are many people, for instance, in Pakistan, you find a significant number of Muslims from Hyderabad who left in 1947, and they say that, you know, the Punjabis talk about themselves and the Bengalis talk about themselves. What about us? We also lost a whole way of life.
The whole of Sindh was empty, you know. I mean, it was actually empty. I mean, if you went to Karachi
December 1947. I mean, I might have been 10 years old, but my people told me it was almost empty. Karachi was empty.
Well, it's true. Karachi and Hyderabad and Sindh, these were Hindu cities, which within the space of a few months underwent an experience like Lahore. Lahore was a Sikh and Hindu city in 1947, and by 48 it had changed. So yes, I think there is a Sindhi story to the partition. I don't disagree with that.
The fundamental question is, how do you stop the Pak's Hate India program? Any solution?
How do you stop? Well, very difficult. Because if it's if a country decides to have a program, what can someone else do? The only thing you can do is rely on other factors. And the fact is that the Hate India program is not new. It's always been there. But you see, there are other developments which take place, which means that hate program doesn't work. And one very important development in the last 20 years is technology. Earlier you could ban papers, or you could only allow certain kinds of opinion to come out of India, which will give the impression that things in India are very bad. Now you can't control opinion anymore because of internet, because of WhatsApp, because of numerous other factors. The other example which comes to mind is of Bollywood. Pakistan banned Bollywood films in 1965. The ban was lifted by a military dictator, by Musharraf in 2005, because the Pakistani film industry told him that if you don't lift this ban, we'll be wiped out. So the old thinking, of government programs and government policies, they don't work in the same way in a new context. So the context is changing.
So it's difficult to change.
This is in some lighter vein, apart from these high-sounding policy matters, how the discomfort or disease, lack of ease, one can face while getting a visa for traveling, if one plans to travel Lahore for a simple 7-day trip.
Well, when relations are on an upswing, then it's relatively easier to get a visa. When they are not so good, then it's difficult to get a visa. So I think you should wait for a good time.
I'm Professor Arun Kumar Sinha,
This will be the last two questions.
retired professor from the University of Bihar. My observation is that the situation in Kashmir just after aggression in 1947 or 48 was different. Sheikh Abdullah was the leader, and he has not decided. The people of Kashmir has not not in favor of aligning with Pakistan. But now the situation is different. My observation is this, that the government of India has mismanaged the situation in such a way that the situation has created. And we should not blame the foreign countries only for this position. So what is your observation regarding this, that the government of India and the political parties in their own greed has mismanaged the situation up to this level? I want your reaction.
I don't think anyone in India will disagree that the situation in Kashmir has been mismanaged. And it's not as if it's been mismanaged now. This has been, there have been various lapses in policies for a very long time. I mean, even in the 60s and 70s, people were talking about wrong policy decisions taken, perhaps even earlier. But you see, the point is that all of this is true. That you can be accused of misgovernance, you can be accused of not doing the right thing, maybe doing too many wrong things. But one also has to see what is at the core of it. And at the core of it is the fact that the Pakistanis have attempted to see what they can to use their locational advantage in Jammu and Kashmir to create as much trouble as possible. So while I agree that we should have to do what we can to see that things improve, but it's also a fact that they have played a role to make life as possible, as difficult as possible. And to say that is not evading one's own responsibility in Kashmir. I think, yes, there are things we should do internally in Kashmir, definitely. But that does not stop me from saying what else is happening over there.
Last question.
My name is Surzuse. I am retired government employee. Sir, in the India-Pakistan relationship, you widely narrated the whole history. My point is that how to talk with the improvement in relation, whom to talk with Pakistan, because there are instances in past the Shimla Pact signed by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Indira Gandhi is not enforceable today. President Musharraf, Pervez Musharraf came to Agra. Atal Bihari Vajpayee had taken good initiative. In night only flew morning to Karachi or Islamabad without signing pact. Now in this present situation, if we try to improve our relationship with Pakistan, now whom with India should talk with, either Pakistan or military dictatorship or any foreign ministry or something?
Well, I think it's an easy answer for us. Everyone asks this question, who to deal with in Pakistan. The fact is that you don't have a choice. You have to deal with whoever is the government. If the government is ineffective, nothing will work. But you don't have a choice of finding someone to talk to who suits you. Because that choice is of the people of Pakistan. You know, we can't change Pakistan's internal situation. However much we may want to, as I said, it's 200 million people. They are going to determine their own future. You will not have the kind of leadership you want. You will have to deal with whatever kind of leadership there is. If it's fighting amongst themselves, then too bad, nothing will happen. I mean, this is really what has happened in the last 3 or 4 years, that despite the Prime Minister, taking so many initiatives, nothing happened because the leadership was ineffective, or the system was not working. If the system works better now, then this question of who to talk to will become less important, because whoever you talk to, if they get along with the others, your points will register.
I thought I would get a word in, but with so many experts in the audience, I don't think there is any time for that. Okay, are you a student? No. Okay, go ahead. One last one.
Last one. I love history, so I'm adding up something here today actually. Heard about the accessions of Junagadh, Jammu and Kashmir and Hyderabad, but something in your slide, I happened to see an accession of color. Can you just give some information about that? I mean, never heard of as far as I'm concerned. And second thing, again in your slide, I see during the decade of 80s, you came directly to J&K insurgency, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, something to do with Punjab insurgency, the relation, I just want to, can you just say something about those? Yeah.
You see, Kalat is what is now called Balochistan, a large part of it. The ruler of Kalat in 1947 felt that he should have an independent country of his own. And he felt that I have a border with Afghanistan, I have a border with Iran, and I have a border with Pakistan, so I should be independent. Jinnah had been his advisor in 1945, 1946, and Jinnah said, yes, you can have a status which is different from other princely states. After August, there was pressure put on him by Pakistan that no, you have to accede to Pakistan like any other princely state. He first kept refusing, and at one stage, because as a means of keeping the Pakistanis at bay, there were rumors that he has acceded to India. And that led to put him in a position where the Pakistanis told him either you sign or we will invade. And he had to sign. But the fact of his accession led to, there was a great deal of resentment in Balochistan. And the first insurgency in Balochistan began then. and then there's been second, third, fourth, fifth up till now. So it's a contested accession, just like J&K. You have the parallel case of Kalak, which had nothing to do with religion. It was a Muslim majority province. But he felt that he had an independent status. On the 80s, I mentioned, you see, it was 80s were contested. There was Kashmir, there was not Kashmir, there was Punjab, there were a number of very tense military situations. There was assassination of Mrs. Gandhi. You had Operation Brass Tacks, and so on. And all those details are very important. They're there in my book. But the important point is it's framed by these 2 years, 1979, which is the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and 1989, which is the Soviet crack-up of the Soviet Union, withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I remember when I went to the Khyber Pass, there's a mess which has little mementos. And there's a memento from the visiting chief of the then West German army chief. Must have been in 91 or 92. And it's a little piece of the Berlin Wall. And it says to the officers and men of the Khyber Rifles for striking the first blow. That the Soviet experience in Afghanistan led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. So, as I said, this led to an enormous sense of triumphalism in the Pakistan military, that we can move mountains. So, 80s is very important because of these 2 years, 79 and 89, and the decade in between.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavan, for what's turned out to be a very long morning session. I would like to announce the next Pakistan lecture we have, which is on 29 September. Understanding Pakistan, Internal Dynamics, Mindset and Indo-Pak Relations by Tilak Devasher, who was a former Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretary in Government of India, and is also the author of 2 books on Pakistan, the second of which was published about 2 months ago, and the first one about 2 years ago, which was also very well received. So Tilak Devasher will be here speaking on 29 September at 11 a.m. We had coverage for today's lecture by Prudent Media, and the lecture will soon be televised by Prudent Media Channel Network. So if you want to revisit the lecture, you can go to television, but of course at a later time, ICG will have a video posted of the lecture online as well. In addition, there's an exclusive interview with Dr. Raghavan, which was conducted earlier this morning. This is again for Prudent Media, and this will be telecast on the next edition of Prudent Media's Ghazali program. And so this is something again which is completely different from what we had this morning. So Prudent Media has been our partner for this particular event and will be our partner for the next event, which is on 29 September with Mr. Tilak Devasher. Thank you all for coming, and thank you once again, Dr. Raghavan, for spending so much time with us.